Then suddenly, trigger snap and muzzles blaze, and as if simultaneously, Garvey and Frost fire point blank at each other, both realizing the end is there for one or both of them. Frost empties 7 bullets into Garvey. Nevertheless, Garvey drags himself up against the hitching post, fires 2 or 3 more shots at Frost, then slumps again and falls dead. Frost is badly wounded. He now has a gaping hole in his stomach, but he crosses the street anyway and hobbles to the corner of Morton and 6th Streets. Yandell Ferris and Calvin Blakely are there. Frost sees the old and infirm ex-treasurer, Woodpecker Jake Blakely, standing near the front of the post office. Ferris, too, sees Blakely, that old woodpecker, and raises his gun to fire at him, but Judge Parker's wife, who had rushed up when the firing began, seizes his arm and begs him not to shoot, saying, "Oh, Yandell, don't you do it. You know it's wrong." But Frost, who had lost his gun, snatches the gun from Ferris's shaking hand and demands, "Give me your gun. I want to kill Blakely." Jaybird Calvin Blakely evidently also thinks of shooting the older Jake Blakely, but lowers his gun and says, "Yes, go on. I can't. He's my uncle." Frost moves down the street, takes dead aim, fires twice, and Blakely falls, mortally wounded. Blakely was unarmed. Colonel P.E. Pearson tries to get Frost to leave the fight and get medical attention, but Frost refuses, saying, "No, let me die. You go on and fight." Then another friend begs Frost to leave the fight, but Frost replies, "I am killed, I am dead, I'm a goner, but I killed Blakely." Blakely had been a woodpecker and had been a leader of the Republican Negro Ring. According to the Jaybirds, he deserved what he got, death. To bring you up to speed, the woodpeckers have the advantage so far. They are now in the courthouse or behind an iron fence that surrounds it and can fire with telling effect at the Jaybirds who are in the open. There's also a sniper firing at the Jaybirds from an upstairs window in the National Hotel. But there are other developments. 3 young Jaybirds, Earl McFarlane, Dolph, and Sid Pearson, perched high above the fray from upstairs in the McFarlane home across the street, take matters into their own hands. Young McFarlane fires a gun from an open north window, striking Judge Parker in the groin, his second wound, as he is coming out of the courthouse. Again, groaning and cursing at the Jaybirds, Parker drags himself back into the courthouse. When the rest of the woodpeckers realize that the person or persons shooting from that upstairs window can pick them off, they retreat into the courthouse and stay there. Finally, all is quiet, except the groans of the wounded. In a matter of some 20 minutes and several hundred volleys, fired by about 35 cursing and shouting men, it was all over. 4 men had lost their lives and several more were wounded. Morton Street in front of the courthouse, the scene of the battle, was an awful sight. The dead, dying, and wounded lay there in their spilled blood. The Jaybird participants looked at each other, seemingly in a daze, as they viewed the scene. For a time, no one went near the scene of the battle. Everyone stayed secluded behind the closed doors at their homes or in places of business. But soon, the initial shock passed. Next, several men and women rushed into the street to care for the dead and wounded. Mrs. Alex McNabb, daughter of Carrie Nation, goes to the dead Garvey and has her husband and Dudley Bell carry him into the Blakely and Bassett General Mercantile Store. Blakely's body is put on a cot outside the courthouse. Later, the bodies of Blakely and Garvey are taken to Blakely's home on Austin Street. Parker, seriously hurt, and Frost, fatally wounded, are given medical attention. Then Frost drags himself home. Parker, too badly wounded to be moved, remains in the courthouse and is soon joined by his family. Sergeant Aiken jumps from his horse and pulls wounded Ranger Smith into a building and sends for a doctor. Deputies Mason and Wade, Wally Gibson, and Will Andrus, who have minor wounds, are also given medical attention. Richmond had plenty of doctors. Finally, a Negro man, no doubt trembling with fear, goes to the limp body of the 5th victim, Little Roby Smith, and carries her away. The 20-minute battle involving 26 Jaybirds and 6 woodpeckers was over. Surprisingly, there were very few casualties considering the number of bullets fired. No blacks had taken part in the battle and continued to be frightened. Richmond remained an armed camp. Soon, news of the battle reached the outside world. Governor Ross received frantic wires from Judge Weston and Sergeant Aiken to send militia. In response, the Houston Light Guard rushed by train from Houston, with the Brenham Grays arriving too. The next day, Saturday, the streets are eerily solemn. Doctors from Houston arrived to attend Henry Red Hot Frost. A 20-minute afternoon shower washes away blood from the sandy street and stains sidewalks. More about the dead. A double funeral service was held for Woodpeckers Blakely and Garvey at the Blakely home at 6 p.m. Jaybird Henry Red Hot Frost, attended by Houston physician, dies. Before he died, he requested a monument be erected in memory of the Jaybird project. You can see it today next to the Richmond City Hall. And finally, a neutral, innocent bystander, little Roby Smith, is laid to rest. On that same day, the Saturday after the battle, Governor Ross and Attorney General Harrison arrived by train at 7 p.m. to assess the situation and find out what happened. There are several contradictory versions of the battle, and no one can agree who shot first. But regardless of the version, the Jaybirds won the battle of August 16, 1889. No Jaybirds talked about it for a long time after the battle, but in the minds of many, nothing was really settled. The feud lived on. As time passed, several tales evolved regarding the feud, and for a period of time, siding with the victorious Jaybirds was required. Judge Finn told this story. A noted Brazoria wag came to Richmond when feelings were high. A partisan immediately approached him with the question, "Are you a Jaybird or a Woodpecker?" The wag, not knowing the questioner's affiliation, finally replied, "I don't belong to either party. I'm a mockingbird, and I'll sing you any tune you wish." But enough of the legend. Here's how the rest of the events unfolded. The presence of the Texas Rangers and the late arrival of the Houston Light Guards and the Brenham Grays put the quietus on any possibility of the feud continuing. Governor Ross arrived on Saturday night and mediated the outcome before he left on Tuesday. Ranger Ira Ayton stayed on as sheriff, maintained the peace, and assisted Judge Weston in restoring county government. Subsequently, the Democrats were able to take control of the government, and the Jaybirds looked for ways to perpetuate that control, so they created a new organization called the Jaybird Democratic Association of Fort Bend County. Their constitution created what was called a white man's union that overwhelmingly dominated Fort Bend politics for more than 6 decades. The Republican Party in Fort Bend County was now all but non-existent, leading the way for the Jaybirds to do their thing. They arranged it so that all county-level Democrat candidates, the Jaybirds did, arranged it that the Democrat candidates had to be approved by the Jaybird Democrat Association before they could get on the Democrat ticket. This ensured that no blacks or other minorities or undesirable whites could get elected. This lasted until the early 1950s. Willie Melton, the well-to-do black farmer from Kendleton, dreamed of ending this nightmare for blacks in Fort Bend County. He was friends and got advice from state NAACP members, which included a young lawyer, Thurgood Marshall. Melton, with the help of Sid Hilliard, a prominent Harris County NAACP member, and Arizona Fleming, a black Richmond businesswoman, began to see his dream fulfilled. On March 16, 1950, they convinced several Fort Bend black voters to be named as plaintiffs against the executive committee of the Jaybird Association. The plaintiffs were John Terry, Jesse Byers, Charlie Roberts, R.E. Pink Jr., and Price Jackson Jr. The 4 Jaybird defendants were A.J. Adams, Mrs. Mattie Schultz, George Lane, and R.M. Darst. The defendants were served with the citations on March 27, 1950. The Texas Coaster, reporting the meeting, clearly indicates the Jaybirds were not going to roll over and die without a struggle. After years of litigation, it finally ended on May 4, 1953, when the Supreme Court of the United States handed down a decision. The argument against the Jaybird organization was that it was illegal, but the court found that the Jaybird Association was indeed legal, and on top of that, the court did not deny it the right to hold primaries. Yet the Jaybird Association lost on its white supremacy tenet. The court ruled the Jaybird Association was indeed a political party, that it came within the scope of the 15th Amendment, and because of this, it could no longer exclude blacks and others from primaries. As it turns out, the Kendleton Heritage Society dedicated a historical marker commemorating this famous case in August 2011 at the Powell Point School Gym. But back to the Jaybird Association. Since the Supreme Court recognized its existence, the Jaybird Association continued to function in county politics for a couple of more decades. Stripped, however, of its original intent to secure a white man's union, and now more involved in seeking a black vote, its members started asking, well, why the Jaybird? Finally, on October 15, 1959, the association voted not to dissolve, but simply recess. There were no more meetings, yet a bank account remained. In 1970, the account had grown to $1,593.80. Judge Gates authorized its closeout. The proceeds were presented to the Fort Bend County Museum Association without restriction. In closing, I would like to ask, how does the story challenge us today? We may have found the story interesting, informative, and even entertaining, but what can we learn? None of us have to look very far to find heated issues among nations, religions, political parties, and even on a personal level among family members, co-workers, and friends. Our conflicts may not end up in a violent street shootout like the Jaybirds and Woodpeckers, but if we're human, we sometimes find ourselves in another kind of shootout with, say, our spouses, or children, or other people, perhaps assassinating their character with lies, rumors, and gossip. I think the challenge, if we choose to accept it, is to transcend our differences and find a courageous way to creatively reconcile with our opponents and make peace that both sides can be happy with. You've been a great audience. Thank you.